gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend, Amanda Blake. Amanda is founder of Embright. She's a speaker and consultant and coach. In fact, we met when I was one of her guinea pigs when she was speaking at the Capital Area Coaches Conference, and I was so taken with her. I wanted to get to know her, so I feel really grateful for that. She's the author of Your Body is Your Brain, and she's the creator of the Body Equals Brain course. She's a master somatic leadership coach. She's got her BS from Stanford University in human biology. She's a research fellow from Fowler Center for Business as an agent of world benefit. Welcome, Mandy.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's good to be here with you and fun to be reminded of how we met as well, which was so delightful. It was so fun to have you up there doing, Allison and I were doing physical practices together in front of the room and exploring how we learn through our bodies. So that's what we'll get to do today. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I'm excited about that. So jumping right in. So when we talk about your body equals brain, you know, that's a really bold name for your course. Like, what does that mean?
Well, what's funny to me is how many people, even sometimes people who've gone through the course, actually get it wrong and say things like body plus brain or body and brain, or worse, sometimes body versus brain. That's not what we're doing. Body equals brain is really what I mean. Your body is stuff with which you do your thinking, your conceptualizing, your decision making, your sensing of your next move. And that is actually really literal. We have brain material out to our fingers and toes. The nerve cells that exist in our distributed brain are the same as the nerve cells that exist in the concentrated area of the brain in the head. But we have other concentrations of nerve cells in our bodies, such as in our gut, our heart, connective tissue that surrounds every muscle and organ in your body. And all of this is actually literally, and I mean this very literally part of our intelligence. So it's really important for us as human development practitioners who are working with people to help them oftentimes make change in their lives, in their organizations, in their whether it's their work lives or their personal lives. It's really important that we understand this intelligence and how it functions. So I really do mean your body is your brain.
So if I can confirm what I think I heard you say, that the cells that are in our brains are also throughout our bodies, and they provide us with intelligence just like the cells of our brains provide us with intelligence. Did I get that right?
You did get that right. And the intelligence that we have that lives sort of below the neck, if you will, has a bunch of things about it that are unique and sometimes different from the intelligence that lives above the neck. So it's a bit of a mix. We don't necessarily do math, for example, with our fingers.
Yeah, right.
I don't do math at all, so it's probably a really bad example. But I'll give you a different example of a friend of mine who was once with a really high level pianist who somebody named she was kind of taking requests from this group gathered around the piano, and somebody named a very little known piece of classical music. And she said, "Oh, I don't know which one you mean. Can you just give me a note?" And he sang the first note, and she just went boom, and her hands were on the keyboard and she was playing it. That's an embodied knowledge, an embodied intelligence, right? And that kind of intelligence can emerge from us very naturally when we just know what to do, for example, in a dangerous situation, or when we know what to do in a workplace situation where two people are in conflict, And we just have a way of dealing with that that helps bring that to resolution. So we have all kinds of embodied intelligence, and it's easiest to see in very physical activities like sports or music, but it also very much influences our, other activities that we do in life, including having an intimate conversation with our spouse, for example.
So how much of that body intelligence is conscious versus unconscious? And thank you, Dennis Funk, for this question. Or I might say it like accessible versus, I don't know if I want to say inaccessible, or maybe it's just conscious and unconscious.
Well, but you could use either of those terms, really. So by design, our biological systems are actually tuned to keep a lot of embodied information, embodied intelligence below our conscious awareness. So unconscious or inaccessible. And that's very much by design. We have, for example, homeostatic systems that manage the temperature in our body, and they do that automatically. If we had to think about that to make sure that we were like the right temperature all the time, that would be a lot of hard work. We wouldn't be able to write poetry or run podinars, right? We need that brain space for something else. So a lot of what happens in our bodies gets put on autopilot. However, the way that that works, what neuroscientists tell us, is that there's this homeostatic level of what's called interoception, or capacity to sense and perceive what's going on for us viscerally. So interoceptive perception happens at a homeostatic level where it's very, very difficult to access. Some people with a lot of training have learned how to do that. There's sort of a second level that is still not really accessible to conscious awareness, but it hits the parts of our brain that are involved in emotion and decision making. So what happens is we'll have some sensation, and before we know it, we'll be having an emotional reaction and taking action. What I sometimes call, this is like the genesis of the knee-jerk response. And I don't mean like that, like the medical knee-jerk response, but the behavioral knee-jerk response. When we bring that interoceptive or visceral sensation into conscious awareness, which we can do by learning different techniques for paying attention to what's going on in our bodies, then we start to get more behavioral choices available to us, because that knee-jerk response, which happens really quickly in the body and brain, you get this experience and then you take action, usually to make some sense of discomfort go away. What we do when we bring that into conscious awareness is we can kind of live with that discomfort for a few moments and see how it's informing us, and make perhaps some more better informed or wiser choices about how to respond to it.
So is implicit in what you're saying is that we can kind of build our interoceptive muscle or senses? Muscle is probably the wrong word, but you know what I mean, that we can become more interoceptive.
We can become more sensitive to our interoceptive perceptions or sensations, our internal sensations. And that's also true. So interoception is not the only body perception that we have. We also have something called proprioception, which is our capacity to sense the position of our body in space. And both of these together, interoception and proprioception, or in other words, just use colloquial language, right? Our visceral sensations, our capacity to notice our gestures, our posture, how we're moving, our capacity to notice all of that combines into something called embodied self-awareness. Not a revolutionary or novel term, but there's actually a clear definition for it in the research literature. That is, our embodied self-awareness is our capacity to pay attention in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to what's happening with our body in space.
Okay, so one of the things we wanted to do is have you take us all through an experience.
Yes.
So would love to do that now. And one of the things I just want to say to the audience is we know we're sacrificing a little bit of interaction with you for the sake of having an experience. So what I hope you'll do is go through this experience with us, and like, you know, maybe put down the phone and no longer multitask and maybe be with us. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Mandy. What are we going to?
Okay, good.
And you,
Well, here's what I would like to invite everyone to do. And Allison, if I can just use you as a guinea pig.
Yes.
So I'm gonna walk you through this, Allison, and everyone will be hearing that. But whenever I say Allison, replace that with your own name. You know, just what I'm doing with Allison, do that yourself. I invite you to do that. Okay, so let's just start here. Think about a time, maybe a recent time, when you were mild to moderately triggered about something, upset about something, something was bothering you. Looks like you have one in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to hear the story about it, but as you think about that situation and really imagine it, bring it to life in your mind. Like, where were you? Was there any sounds? Maybe you were talking to someone, or maybe getting the silent treatment. So just notice what was happening in the world around, and what did you see? And just turn it in to anywhere where you can find a strong sensation in your body. And if you can just put your hand there on the strongest sensation that you notice. If you can't reach it, then just notice it. And Allison, what is that for you? Where are you feeling a strong sensation as you think about this triggering event?
What's coming up for me is it feels more like a holistic constriction. I don't necessarily feel it in any one place as much as I feel it every place.
Yeah. And what's happening? So you described it as a constriction. So you're feeling every place a constriction. Can you describe that constriction with a little more color and detail?
Yeah. So for me, literally, I felt like my vision narrowed. I felt my thought pattern definitely narrowed. That's why it's so easy for me to think. You're like, can you remember the time? I'm like, yeah, I remember it. It looked like this. Yeah, and I think I was probably kind of hunched over and like smaller and more, like girding my loins. If that translates.
Yeah, great. So if you could, you don't have to do this, but just notice for you, and listeners notice for you, if there's one thing. So you mentioned 5 or 6 different things going on that were all part of, sometimes I'll call this like a constellation, right? If there was like a central star in that constellation, one thing that was sort of like, oh, it's really about the tightening of the eyes, or it's really about narrowing, or it's really about the girding of the loins. Like one thing that sort of seems to be either more prominent than the others or influential.
You know, something I actually didn't mention comes up for that is it's like, for me, there's like a revving of the engine. And I feel it throughout my body, and most in the racing's not quite the right word, like just like the thumping, the pounding of my heart.
Okay, great. So that revving of the engine, that pounding of your heart, just kind of remember that. Let's set that to the side, and let's say that's a part of this constellation of narrowing and girding, right? Revving, narrowing, and girding. So set that aside for now, and kind of shake that off. You might actually physically want to move your body and move out of that state. And see if you can now imagine a time when you felt particularly resourceful. and in a way that feels really good to you. So maybe it's confidence, or maybe it's some sense of anticipation, right? But somewhere in your life, a specific situation where you felt really like powerfully strong, able, capable, ready.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to hear the story, but if you just take yourself to that place in time in your imagination, and that specific moment, who was around you, what um, windows or walls or trees or wind might have been around you,
Mm-hmm.
any particular tastes or smells, really putting yourself there in your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you imagine that, notice what's going on in your body right now. And same kind of thing. Like if there's a strong sensation, go ahead and find that with your hand, as if your hand was a magnet and it could be pulled to that strongest sensation. And again, you may not be able to get your hand there because maybe physically it's like somewhere on your back, or maybe it's your whole body. So it's not someplace you can put your hand. And just notice, like, what is the sensation? What's your posture? And what are you noticing, Allison?
What I'm noticing is my eyes, like literally, I could see more. It's like going from this to not just kind of normal sight, but actually expanded sight.
Mm-hmm.
It also just a feeling of solid bodily groundedness, like some gravitational, comfortable gravitational pull toward the earth. Just, yeah.
Great. So like a widening expansiveness and a sense of solidity and groundedness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's do this. What I'd like to suggest you do is go ahead and let that narrowing and revving come back in. And if it seems hard to access, you can really imagine that situation again.
Mm-hmm.
Place yourself there in the imagination, and just notice how when you do that, your body might have even just a tiny subtle response.
Mm-hmm.
But you can amplify that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a revving, you can rev a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
There's a girding. See if you can gird on purpose.
Yeah.
Narrow on purpose. And now if you were, in a sense, walking across a bridge or creating a path between this girded, narrowed, revved up state, what's the first move you would make to get to that expansive, grounded state?
Must be taking a breath, because that's what I just did.
Mm-hmm.
Like just, yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that I noticed is as you took a breath, you also lifted your chin and you let your eyes go up and out.
Yeah.
Right? So that narrowness automatically expanded as you took a breath.
Mm-hmm.
For many of you who are listening, you might also think, oh, my first move is taking a breath. And that is so true. And one of the reasons for that is because our breath is both under our voluntary control and it's under the control of our autonomic nervous system, which runs those homeostatic mechanisms that I talked about earlier. So it happens automatically without thinking about it, and we can also intervene. And we have different breath patterns that accompany different emotions or moods. So shifting your breath is really powerful. And if we were all on screen, I'd say, let's see a show of hands of how many people always remember to do that in the heat of the moment. And I've asked that question a lot of times, and I'd say it's anywhere between 30 and 50% of us that can honestly say we always remember. And it's usually closer to the 25, 30%. I question whether those folks are telling the truth. I know I forget a lot.
They don't have my family.
I guess not mine either. Um, so the reason I mention that is because taking a breath is always a really good first, and there's something else we can do. And what I saw you do, Allison, was take that narrowness that you really talked about that. It was the first thing that you mentioned, right? This constriction and narrowness, especially in your eyes and in your thinking. And you opened up that narrowness. So if you could just do that now, like 2 or 3 times, go see if you can just bring yourself from a narrowness. And there might even be a word or an attitude that goes along with that. So if one arises, just notice. If one doesn't, that's okay. But if you can put yourself in that it might even just be narrowness. I don't know.
And what am I naming with my word?
Kind of an attitude, or like, here's my attitude.
The constricted attitude, or the attitude that gets me out of it?
The constricted attitude.
Yeah, small is my word.
Small, yeah. So, so go from small, the whole constellation of small, and taking a deep breath and expanding your vision, move into the whole constellation of what's your attitude here?
Yeah, possibility.
So if we had more time, the way I would continue to work with this is to have you move back and forth between small and possibility many times until your body starts to get a feel for what it is like to deliberately shift from small to possibility, from small to possibility. And then we would start to develop, if you were my coaching client, some practices for you to use in your day-to-day life that have you automatically make that shift and build the muscle memory to move from small to possibility. Now, when I'm working with coaching clients, we might spend 12 sessions on this. I've done that. And because this can go really deep, right? We spent 10 minutes on it here. But the stories that go into being small in a given situation, the fears that might come up around possibility, right? And the necessity of the physical practice to kind of underscore developing a new way of being in the world and embodying it. All of that takes time. So, you know, I won't leave you high and dry. Allison promised some resources at the beginning. We'll give you those at the end. So there's more ways that you can practice this, but this is a taste, and I want to caveat it with that. Hopefully a yummy taste.
I can see how it'd be just incredibly powerful. So just one question, then I want to take it back to the audience here for questions. So what all of that relies upon is my ability to notice when I'm, in my word, small.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about like what the power of just noticing is. You know, I'm going through this mindfulness meditation teacher training too, and it's throughout the work we do at Learning in Action and relational and emotional intelligence, where we talk about noticing and naming. What is it that makes noticing and naming so powerful?
Yeah. I don't know if I can comment on that broadly. I can comment on that as specifically as how noticing and naming in the body is powerful. In ways that I personally haven't found noticing and naming conceptually to be as powerful for me personally. And everybody learns in different ways, right? But those aren't also powerful. So noticing and naming our embodied experience does a number of different things. One is that it takes us to the present moment. You cannot experience your sensations anywhere else but right now. And you may not have noticed this, Allison, but I asked you to remember a time with your imagination, but then I asked you, what are you feeling in your body right now? Not what did you feel then? but what are you feeling now? Because we actually can only experience sensation right now. So exploring what's happening in your client's body will automatically bring them to the present moment. And then what happens when we move into the present moment in an embodied way is that we come very nakedly into our direct experience, right? So this is experience without abstraction, without ideas layered over the top. This is actually just like what's happening right now. I'm tightening between my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
So it brings us to the present moment. It gives us very direct experience.
Mm-hmm.
And in time, as we develop our facility to really sense ourselves more, that direct experience, I've seen this over and over, starts to lead towards a doorway to what one embodiment teacher, her name's Judith Blackstone, calls fundamental consciousness, right? So this is the very basic primary sense of awareness that all living things experience, right? From an infant to a bumblebee to who knows how a tree or a plant works, but there's a lot of scientific evidence that they deliberately seek out water, that they have ways of signaling one another, right? And so there is this fundamental awareness that runs, a current that runs through all living beings. And we touch that when we touch into our very direct experience. And so coming into the present moment and into direct experience and into our noticing of this fundamental consciousness is nourishing, it's restorative, and I believe it gives us kind of a line into some wisdom that is bigger than us as individuals.
Mm-hmm. That feels so true. Thank you. That was
Yeah.
really rich. Yeah, I'm still taking that in. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. We promised we'd come to questions from the audience. I'm going to take the ones from the Q&A box first, and then I'll go to Chris to see what's coming up in the chat. So we have a question from Primitivo. I probably butchered that. I apologize. She says, these are built-in patterns that are ontological and somatic at the same time, question mark?
Yeah, so hi Tivo. Tivo and I know each other. And hi to everyone else that I do and don't know. Are these patterns, meaning I'm assuming Tivo's talking about like the patterns that I worked with you on, ontological and somatic at the same time. And for those who don't know what those terms are, ontological is essentially like our way of being in the world. Somatic is described often as a sort of holistic body, mind, spirit way of knowing our way of being in the world. And so I would say, yes, these are both ontological and somatic. They're this state, you know, that I kind of walked you through, Allison, has elements of language or conceptualization, as well as physical states, as well as some emotion or mood that are all part of what's going on here. And so I guess the other thing that I didn't say about, you know, in answer to your prior question, like, why is this so powerful to notice what's going on in your body? I guess the one thing that I would add to that is that it makes our approach as people working with people more holistic. So we're not just working with people on a conversational or holistic level, but we're working with all of them, body, mind, spirit, mood. And that also makes this approach very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Question from Lori Fisher. How does our vagus nerve that runs body play a role in this body-brain connection? She says, I have various ideas using tuning note to help that now focus. Using tuning note to help that now focus you mentioned.
Okay, I think I understand this question. So Lori, I'm going to give it a shot. So the vagus nerve plays a critical role. And let me just define what that is. So the vagus nerve is a nerve that runs through your brain, right down straight through the middle of you. It parallels your spinal cord, but it does not go through your spinal cord. It's one of 12 cranial nerves that don't run through your spinal cord. And the vagus nerve innervates your heart, your gut, to a certain extent, your lungs, and it plays a really, really important role in all of the homeostasis that I was talking about earlier, kind of running your systems under the scenes, right, under your conscious awareness. One of the interesting things about the vagus nerve is that it sends most of its information up to the brain and takes very little direction from the brain. So there's about, depending on whose data you read, about an 80% or 90% estimate of the number of nerves running from the vagus nerve up to the brain, which essentially means that our visceral sensations are mostly traveling up to this what we typically think of as the central command center, right? But actually, that center is that sort of centralized area of nerve cells in our brain per se, right? Brain in the head, is taking a huge amount of information from the body, especially the trunk, especially the torso, and parsing it into assessments of, is this good or is this bad? Am I safer? Am I in danger? Some of those may be accurate, some of those may be inaccurate. So the vagus nerve plays a really, really important role. It also plays a really important role in our response to pressure and danger. So anything that we perceive as potentially threatening, including a difficult conversation, right? The vagus nerve will be activated in a number of various ways, beyond just fight flight. So it plays an important role in the fight flight system, as well as sometimes having us freeze in response to pressure, sometimes having us kind of appease an aggressor or communicate in a particular way in response to aggressor. Now, I want to correct something that I sort of misspoke a moment ago. It's not right to say that our body controls all of these behaviors, right? So I kind of used some language that pointed in that direction. It's not like our behaviors are controlled by our body, but there is a strong two-way influence between our thoughts and our behavior, or three-way influence between thoughts and behavior, behavior and body, body and behavior, body and mind, da, 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 da. And breaking these things down is really an artificial distinction, right? We are whole systems, and we kind of operate more like we can pull out different notes on the piano and play them one at a time. But in our daily lived experience, it's more like we're playing a chord. We're playing multiple notes at the same time. And what's happening in your body, your behavior, your thinking self, your mood, it's all woven of the same cloth. Mm-hmm. So to suggest that any one part of it is causal would be inaccurate.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that clarification. So taking that experience we just had, which was super enlightening and helpful, what is the cue that your client or coachee might give you that they would benefit from some kind of experience like that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So I think there are a lot of cues you can watch for. So a really easy one is if your client is starting to drone on and on, right? And you're listening and your client's just like, blah, 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 and right there, you know that they're in abstraction, they're really thinking, they're distant from the experience. You can help them get back into the present moment by helping them get into their bodies right there in that moment. They don't even necessarily have to slow down a lot to do that. You can just simply ask something like, I noticed that you're talking really fast. Can you tell me, like, where's the revved up energy in your body, right? Like, where do you feel most revved up right now? So you can take just something that's simple and help them tune into what their physical experience is in the moment. So watch for people talking fast or a lot. watch for any physical cues. So I was recently coaching someone. This was in a live coaching demo as part of a teaching I was doing. And the guy said something like, well, I'm really thinking, and maybe I want to move more towards empathy, but maybe more it's acceptance, or maybe it's compassion, right? And the whole time he's talking about like trying to make this decision, which was very conceptual, he had this like, this was really tight, furrowed brow. And so I just asked him like, what's going on between your eyebrows, right? And we did a whole coaching that was just around this little space between his eyebrows. And at the end of the coaching, he was able to say, oh, it's not empathy or compassion or acceptance at all. It's an entirely third thing, which I now don't remember, or fourth thing or whatever, but it got him to a really different place of much greater clarity. So you can watch what's going on in your client's body and use that as a cue. And then the third thing that I would say is that's maybe a little harder to listen for, but with practice, you'll get better at it, is to listen for embodied metaphors, which show up all the time, right? So people will be in a situation where they say, I don't know, I just feel like I'm drifting, like I'm floating, like I'm, and that's a very kind of physical sensation. Or they'll just say, oh, it's like this albatross around my neck, right? Which is a very physical thing. So listen for embodied metaphors and start asking questions from there. Well, what's that heaviness? Tell me where you're feeling the most heaviness. There's a time where you experienced more of the quality that you want to feel. How's that different from heaviness, right? So those are three, I think, useful things to listen for.
Would you mind just maybe sharing 30 seconds or so more between like how you worked with the guy, like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to remember. I think what I would say in a nutshell is, I started to ask him about this furrowed brow. I started to ask him about, and he really noticed, oh, this shows up a lot in this, like chronically, and especially in this situation. And we kind of, in a similar way that I explored with you, this narrowing, we kind of explored the whole constellation. So it's not just the narrowed brow, but how does this change your attitude? How does this change the way you're thinking in the moment? What happens to your mood? What else is happening in your body, right? And then we started to explore, as I recall, and I'm not sure I'm recalling this quite correctly, but I think we really started to explore, like I had him unfurrow his brow, just do that much, and notice what else started to change. And then from there, we started to explore, what feels different. I think he wound up with some words like something like free and open, rather than empathy and acceptance. I mean, it wound up being something really different. And he was like, oh, I'm going to bring myself to these conversations in a really different way and be much more aware of what's going on in my face, and to, want to bring myself with more of this free and open orientation and way of being.
Thank you for that. That was super valuable. So I'm curious, so when you are going to do, so somatic work is very different, at least from my experience, it's very different for most people.
Yeah.
At least the client base I work with, that would be very different.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about how you orient your clients, the ones that don't come to you because you're a somatic coach, right? Maybe they come to you because they have something else they want to work on, right? Like how you orient them to the more experiential somatic aspect of your work.
Yeah. So there are a couple different things that I do, and I do still work with clients that are kind of naive to this approach or aren't specifically looking for it. Because I'm now a little bit known for this, more people come to me specifically for this. But I had a lot of years where, I was working with people who had no idea. And it's actually part of why I went into studying the science, because I wanted A, for myself to understand, like, why is this so powerful? And B, to have a language to explain to people in ways that they could understand. So here's what I tend to do. I will talk about the science because I know about the science and it interests me. So, I'll mention a tidbit. Oh, did you know that your, vagal nerve has an impact on your fight flight response, and the position of your torso, whether you're upright or collapsed, will affect the way your vagal nerve is communicating with your brain, right? So that's not something you can do unless you've kind of like studied that stuff. But if you do know some of those things, they're great to drop in as like just a throw the intellect a bone, right? So if you know those things, those are great to drop in. What I would say is, if that's not of interest to you, or you just don't have that at your fingertips, you can just be really open and experimental with your clients. So I will often just say, if I don't want to distract with some tidbit of information, I'll just say, would you like to try an experiment here? Or sometimes I'll say something just as simple as, hey, this isn't very well known, but we have intelligence all the way out to our fingers and toes, and let's try something with your body that might reveal something new. And we'll just see if it works for you. It may not, right? So I tend to be really, really open and invitational and experimental. And the other thing that I would say is, I tend to start slowly and with very small tastes. And the reason for that is working with the body is very emotionally evocative. And there's a lot of research behind this, but we don't just remember things as ideas, but we remember things as felt sense. So I'll give you an example of that maybe some of you will be able to relate to, of remembering as felt sense. Long ago, I was in a difficult relationship that ended badly. And every time I drove by the exit to where this guy lived, I would feel sick inside. My heart would start to race. I would have a physical reaction to driving by that exit. Now, some of you have probably had experiences, whether joyous ones or more difficult ones, where your body remembered something, right? Had a particular reaction. And so no matter who we're working with, their bodies remember something. And sometimes their bodies remember things that were emotionally intense for them in some way, which can include trauma and abuse, but doesn't necessarily have to. And so just know that working through the body is really emotionally evocative, and it's best for us to really start small and stay within the bounds of our competence in working there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love how, I think when I think about this idea with some of my clients, their initial take with it, they'd be like, this is really woo-woo. And when bringing in the silence, and here's the reason to believe, it's not just kind of what one might call woo-woo. That's, yeah. And one of the things we've talked about is is the importance of, if we're going to do this work, really becoming educated in it. Yeah. And so if someone's interested in this work, what would you recommend they do in terms of figuring out how they would explore using it, learning it, of course, with themselves, and then using it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the first thing that I was going to say in response, is that even more so than other approaches to working with people, you have to go through this process yourself. And by this process, I mean, you have to be able to sense yourself, learn to recognize your own body's cues. And the vast majority of us, this might not be you, listener, but the vast majority of us are in kindergarten compared to how much we've educated our intellect, right? So we're starting out at a whole different level of learning with a very different kind of learning. And if you've ever played a sport or an instrument or done theater or done like sculpture artwork, you know that to build any kind of muscle memory, you have to practice and repeat and do things over and over. So this kind of learning requires an investment of time, something I very much resisted when I first started to get into it. It can require an investment of money alongside that, depending on how you go about it. But it absolutely requires an investment of time. And there are many, many places where you can learn to deepen your own embodied self-awareness. And that's what I suggest you do first. And then and I'll say in a moment, a resource on the website where you can get more info about that. But once you're on the path of deepening your own embodied self-awareness, then what I would say is start to integrate what you're learning in your own body into the questions that you use with clients. And one of the things that you can do is just challenge yourself in any given coaching session, for example, to ask 2 questions about your client's embodied experience. You can do that starting now, right? But really, really develop your own embodied self-awareness first. So on the Embright website, I got this question a lot, actually, like, how can I learn more? And who should I go study with? And people were actually hiring me and paying really high coaching rates for me to just give them recommendations. So I was like, that's not a good use of your money. Let me just write it all down. So there's a resource on the Embright website. If you go, I think, to embright.org /wisdom-within, where I have both the guide to becoming a body wise coach and this Wisdom Within book that I put together, ebook that I put together, that has practices from a whole bunch of different really amazing teachers. So it's a great survey of the field. It's not a complete, there's more that I would like to include. It's not a complete survey of the field, but it's pretty comprehensive and a good way to learn how to learn more.